Maya Collins stepped off the transport shuttle and felt the artificial gravity push down on her. It was lighter than Earth gravity, but her body knew the difference. The station corridors stretched out before her in clean lines and bright lights. Everything here was ordered. Everything was safe. She did not belong. The Galactic Academy sat in orbit around Sanctuary Station, a place where the most advanced species in the galaxy sent their young to learn. They came here. The ethereals came here. They came here. All the civilized species, all the ones who had built technology and culture and philosophy. And now, for the first time in 300 years, a human had been admitted. Maya pulled her single bag behind her as a student pointed toward the residential wing. They had 4 arms, a flexible spine, and eyes that moved independently. She tried not to stare. She had studied these species in preparation, read everything about their biology and their customs. Nothing had prepared her for how real they would look in person. The student housing was large. Each species had been given a section designed for their biology. Humans got basic accommodations, a bed that was slightly too firm, a chair that did not fit her frame properly, a window that looked out at the stars and through those stars at the planet she had left behind. Earth was a brown and blue marble from this distance. She could not see the storms, she could not see the predators, she could not see the places where she had grown up learning to be careful. She could only see that it was far away and that she was here and that she had to make this work. The first day of orientation brought all the students together in the main hall. There were hundreds of them. Beings of crystal and light and metal and biology she had no name for. They moved with the confidence of creatures who had never worried about being eaten, who had never run from storms, who had never learned that the universe wanted them dead. The academy director was unnamed. Her body was made of a substance that looked like glass but felt warm when she shook Maya's hand. She was kind in a distant way, the kind of kind that came from knowing you were in control of everything. "We are honored to have a human representative at our academy," the director said to the entire assembly. "We hope this marks the beginning of greater understanding between our species and humanity. We believe that diversity strengthens our community and that your presence will help us all learn new perspectives." Maya nodded and sat down with the other students. The ethereals ignored her. They were beings of pure energy contained in biomechanical shells, and they seemed to vibrate at a frequency that made humans uncomfortable. They sat in a separate section and communicated through light patterns that the translators had difficulty interpreting. They were more open. Some of them approached her and asked basic questions about Earth. But their questions were clinical. How much gravity? What was the atmospheric composition? What percentage of the planet was covered in water? They treated her world like a data set, something to be analyzed rather than understood. By the time evening came, Maya had been assigned her classes, given her schedule, and shown to the dining hall. The food was synthesized from basic proteins. It did not taste like anything she remembered from Earth. That was probably good. Less homesickness that way. She was sitting alone at a table in the corner when the commotion started. A new student had arrived. The other students seemed to understand who she was before she even entered the dining hall. They organized themselves. The best tables were suddenly available. They adjusted their seating. They stopped their conversations and looked toward the entrance. The student was stunning. Her exoskeleton was burnished gold and moved with precise control. She had 4 eyes arranged across her face, and each one seemed to be processing information separately. She wore markings that indicated high status, symbols embedded into her carapace that glowed with faint light. Her name was announced formally. From the collective, a species known for their advanced technology, their military strength, and their complete certainty about where they stood in the galactic hierarchy. They were above everyone else. This was not something they said. It was simply something everyone understood. They had the most advanced weapons, the most sophisticated technology, the most efficient military structure. They had resources and power and control. They looked at other species the way old civilizations looked at younger ones. Moved through the dining hall like she owned it. She selected a table in the center of the room. They had already moved to the next table over, creating space around her as if being too close would diminish them. The ethereals dimmed their light patterns, a gesture of respect. Even they, who were generally confident and direct, seemed to adjust themselves in the presence of the student. Maya watched from her corner. She watched the way commanded attention without saying anything. She watched how the other students organized themselves around a hierarchy that was clear and unspoken. Humans and their social structures seemed completely absent from this arrangement. She looked down at her synthesized food and ate alone. Later that night, Maya went to the hydroponics lab. It was one of the few places on the station that felt like Earth. Green things grew here, things that moved because they were alive, not because they were programmed. The tomato plants reminded her of her mother's garden on Earth. The lettuce plants reminded her of the small growing boxes in the habitats. The air smelled different here, cleaner, more alive. She was pruning dead leaves when the door opened. Stood in the doorway, her 4 eyes examining the space with what looked like disdain. "This is a plant growth chamber," she said, not a question. "It is," Maya replied, not turning around. "I have reviewed the Academy records," said. "You are the human from the—" Maya set down her shears. She turned to face the student directly. She did not bow, she did not show fear, she simply stood and looked at her. "I am," Maya said. "The records indicate that your species has a violent history, that you are biologically weak, that your planet's conditions would be immediately lethal to most civilized species. I found it unusual that someone from your background was permitted entry to this academy." Moved closer and her mandibles clicked together. It might have been a gesture of curiosity. It might have been a threat. "Your entrance examination scores were high. This is confusing." Maya picked her shears back up and returned to pruning. "Entrance exams measure problem solving," she said. "They measure how you think when you have time to think. They do not measure what you do when everything is falling apart. They do not measure what you do when you are cold and hungry and scared. They do not measure how you survive when there is no safety net." "That is not relevant to academic performance," said. "Maybe not," Maya replied, "but it is relevant to who I am, and who I am is someone who learned to think clearly when it was hard. I learned to see solutions when most people would see only problems. I learned to keep going when stopping would have been easier." She looked up from the plants. She smiled it was not a large smile. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had looked at death and decided to survive anyway. It was the smile of someone who understood that fear was just information and that information could be used. Did not respond. She simply stared at the human girl for a long moment. Then she turned and left the hydroponics lab. Maya finished her pruning and went back to her room. The stars were still visible through her window. Earth was still there, spinning in the darkness. And she was here at the academy in a place where no one expected her to survive. 3 days had passed since arrived at the academy. 3 days of watching the student move through the corridors like she owned them. 3 days of seeing the other students reorganize themselves around her presence. 3 days of silence and distance, and the clear message that humans did not belong in this social order. Maya had stopped trying to engage with the other students. She went to her classes. She studied in the library when it was empty. She spent time in the hydroponics lab where the only judgment came from plants that did not care about her species. On the 4th day, everything changed. The alarm came during morning meal. Not a warning alarm, an emergency alarm. The kind of sound that meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. The security team activated the station-wide announcement system, and the director's voice came through, controlled and clear but carrying an edge that could not be hidden. "All students report to designated shelter areas immediately. Repeat, all students report to designated shelter areas immediately. This is not a drill." The dining hall erupted into controlled chaos. The species that had been so carefully organized moments before suddenly became frightened beings trying to find safety. The moved with military precision. The ethereals dimmed completely, a defensive response. The moved together, communicating through their psionic network. Maya moved toward the shelter zone that had been assigned to her species section, but a security officer grabbed her arm. "Wait," the officer said. "Do not go that way, the breach is in your sector." A breach, something had broken through the station's containment. Something was on the loose. The announcement came next, and Maya felt her blood go cold. A void specimen had escaped containment. The creature was loose in the residential wing. All personnel were to shelter in place or evacuate through designated corridors only. A void specimen. Maya had learned about these in her studies. They were creatures from the dark zones between stars, beings that had evolved in environments that made no biological sense to normal life. They consumed matter indiscriminately. They were fast. They were violent. They were completely incompatible with civilized space. The Academy had one in containment for research. It had never escaped before. The security officer was trying to direct her away from the residential zone, but Maya could see the problem. The shelter zones were in the residential sector. The alternate routes would take twice as long. The students in her section would run out of time. She pulled away from the officer and ran toward the residential wing. "You cannot go that way," the officer shouted. "That is where the specimen is." Maya did not stop. The corridors were in chaos. Students were running in different directions. Some were trying to reach the shelters. Some were trying to evacuate through emergency exits. Some were simply running without understanding where they were going. She reached her sector and started moving toward the shelter zone. The walls here were shaking. Something massive was moving through the corridors. She could hear it before she could see it. A sound like nothing she had ever heard. Not a roar, not a scream, just the sound of wrong things happening in a place that was supposed to be safe. Then she saw it. The void specimen did not have a fixed form. It was a mass of something that might have been matter or might have been energy. It shifted and flowed and twisted. Its edges were not clear. One moment it was solid. The next moment it seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could process. Looking at it directly made her brain hurt. It was consuming the corridor. Where it moved, the walls dissolved. Where it touched, the structure simply stopped existing. Students were running everywhere now. The security team was trying to respond, but their weapons passed through the creature as if it were not there. The ethereals tried to interfere with its energy patterns and nearly got consumed themselves. They tried to anchor it with their psionic abilities and succeeded only in confusing themselves. Everyone was evacuating. Everyone was running. Everyone but one person. Maya stood in the middle of the corridor. She was looking directly at the void specimen. She was looking at something that should not exist, at something that every instinct she had told her was wrong and dangerous and incomprehensible. And she did something that no one else had thought to do. She stopped running. She closed her eyes, not in fear, not in panic. She closed them in the way she had learned to close them 1,000 times before, on Earth. When the storms came and you could not run anymore. When the predators were near and you could not see them. When the gravity tried to crush you and you could not escape it. She stood absolutely still in the corridor, and she waited. The void specimen noticed her. It turned. Every student who was watching through the observation windows felt their hearts stop. This was the end. The human girl would be consumed. The tragedy would multiply. They had already lost 3 staff members to this creature. Now they would lose a student. But something unexpected happened. The void specimen hesitated. It moved toward Maya, a writhing mass of impossible geometry. It was close now, less than 2 meters away. It should have attacked. It should have consumed her. Everything about the creature's nature suggested that this was exactly what it would do. Instead, it paused. Maya's breathing was steady. She was not hyperventilating. She was not shaking. She was simply standing in the corridor of a space station orbiting a peaceful world, and she was doing something that most beings would consider impossible. She was remaining calm in the face of something incomprehensible. In that moment, the containment team activated the secondary protocols. Magnetic fields engaged. Radiation burst through the corridors. Pressure differentials activated in sequence. These were designed not to kill the creature, but to confuse and disorient it. The void specimen screamed, or made a sound that might have been a scream. It was a noise that hurt to hear. It was a noise that made everyone in the observation galleries cover their ears. And it retreated. It flowed backward, pulling away from Maya, moving back toward the specialized containment unit that the security team had been preparing. And Maya followed it, step by step, maintaining that perfect calm, maintaining that absence of panic that seemed to confuse the creature far more than all the weapons and protocols and technology ever had. When the containment unit sealed, the entire observation gallery released a breath that they had not realized they were holding. The commander was the first to approach her. She was a being of pure crystal, and her form seemed to vibrate with emotion. "How did you know it would retreat?" she asked. "I did not know," Maya said quietly. "But on Earth, when a predator is uncertain, they hesitate. If you run, they chase you. If you panic, it triggers their hunt response. But if you stay still and calm, it makes them question whether you are a threat they want to engage with." She looked at the commander. The void creature operates on instincts, very old instincts, older than most civilizations, so I just waited. The director approached next. Then the security team. Then the other students slowly, like they were approaching something they did not quite understand. That was extraordinarily brave, the director said. And extraordinarily dangerous. You could have died. Yes, Maya agreed. But people in the shelter zones would have died if that creature was not contained. And I have been trained my entire life to make choices like that, to risk myself, to survive when survival seems impossible. She looked around at all of them, and ethereals and in all the other species that had been so certain of their place in the galactic hierarchy. On my world, she said, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing what needs to be done even though you are afraid. Everyone on Earth knows this. We learn it before we learn anything else. The void specimen was secure. The danger had passed, but something fundamental had shifted in the academy. The human girl had done what the most advanced training and the most sophisticated technology had failed to do. She had understood something about fear and survival that transcended species and biology and advancement. That night in her small room, Maya sat by the window and looked at the stars. She did not feel brave. She felt tired. She had survived another impossible thing, just like she had survived 1,000 impossible things before. The universe would not change. It would still be dangerous. There would still be creatures and forces that did not care about her safety. But she was still here. She was still breathing. She was still moving forward. Just like she always did. Far away in the collective's research sector was accessing classified files. She was reading the anthropology records that she had requested just hours before the incident. And as she read, she began to understand something that none of her previous education had prepared her for. The academy shut down classes for 3 days while the investigation continued. The void specimen had to be studied. The containment systems had to be reviewed. The security protocols had to be redesigned. The station filled with official investigators and security personnel who questioned everyone and documented everything. During those 3 days, read the restricted Earth anthropology files. She read the data on human childhood survival rates. Less than 60% of children born on Earth made it to adulthood. 60%. On Prime, the number was 99.9%. The difference was staggering. It was unimaginable. She read the data on human resilience. The records showed that humans experienced trauma at levels that would be considered genocidal on most worlds. They faced predation from megafauna. They faced weather patterns that could kill them instantly. They faced gravity that was trying to break their bones. They faced diseases and parasites and environmental hazards that seemed designed specifically to end life. Yet they survived, not just individually, collectively. Entire civilizations thrived on a world that should have been incompatible with sapient life. Sat in the research center and accessed more files, medical records, psychological evaluations, historical documents, everything she could find about Earth and humanity. The more she read, the more she understood that she had been wrong about everything. Advancement was not the same as strength. Technology was not the same as wisdom. Safety was not the same as courage. On the 3rd day, the Academy held a memorial service for the staff members who had died in the incident. The director spoke about sacrifice. The spoke about duty. The ethereals spoke about the interconnectedness of all life. Maya stood silently throughout the service. She did not cry, she did not speak, but something about her presence seemed to communicate a kind of understanding that the other students could not quite name. She was acknowledging loss without being destroyed by it. She was grieving without breaking. When the service ended and everyone began to disperse, approached her. I accessed the Earth anthropology files, said without any preliminary greeting. I reviewed the survival data, the injury rates, the mortality statistics, the predation patterns, the environmental hazards. The records indicate that children on Earth experience trauma at levels that would be considered genocidal on most worlds. Yet you maintain emotional stability. You demonstrate clear cognitive function. You do not exhibit the psychological symptoms that would be predicted. Maya looked at the student for a moment. Is that a question? She asked. How, said, the word was simple, but it carried weight. How do humans survive becoming what you have become? How do you develop strength instead of breaking? Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down on one of the memorial benches. After a moment, sat beside her. For an alien being and a human girl, it was an unusual sight. The other students who saw them together seemed confused about what they were witnessing. We do not develop strength instead of breaking, Maya said slowly. We develop the strength to break and keep going. It is different. It is important that you understand the difference. Explain, said. On Earth, everything is trying to kill you. That is just the way it is. The weather is trying to kill you. The gravity is trying to break your bones. The animals are trying to eat you. The sun will burn you. The night will freeze you. There are diseases and parasites and predators of every size and temperament. The oceans have things in them that can kill you faster than you can react. The forests have things that hunt in ways that are difficult to predict. Maya looked out at the space beyond the station. Somewhere in that vast emptiness was Earth, the world she had come from. And yet, she continued, my people still had children, we still built cities, we still created art and music and literature, we still tried to make the world better, we still loved each other. We still made sacrifices for people we did not even know, not because the danger was not real, not because we pretended that everything was safe. We did it because the danger was real and we decided to live anyway. That is illogical, said. It is completely illogical, Maya agreed. It makes no sense from a survival standpoint. The logical response would be to give up, to accept that a world like Earth is incompatible with civilization. But humans never listened to logic when it came to survival. We listened to something else. We listened to the need to keep going, the need to see tomorrow, the need to take care of each other even when taking care of ourselves was difficult enough. Was processing this information. She was trying to fit it into the frameworks she had been taught. Nothing aligned. Everything she had learned about hierarchy and species advancement and the proper order of civilization seemed wrong when you applied it to humans. The void creature hesitated, said. When you faced it, it did not attack, it retreated. How did you know that would happen? I did not know, Maya said, but I had faced predators before on Earth, and I had learned that predators operate on instinct. They are not thinking logically. They are responding to signals. When you run, you look like prey. When you panic, you look like prey. But when you are calm and still, you become incomprehensible to them. You become uncertain, and uncertainty makes predators hesitate. You learned this as a survival mechanism, said. I learned this as a child, Maya said. Because on Earth, you learn very quickly or you die. Humans do not have the luxury of learning slowly. We do not have the option of making mistakes and surviving them. Every mistake is dangerous. Every decision has consequences, so we learn how to think quickly. We learn how to understand complex situations. We learn how to survive in places where survival should be impossible. They sat in silence for a moment. I challenged you when you arrived, said finally. I was disrespectful. I assumed that your world and your people were primitive because your technology was less advanced. I did not consider that advancement and sophistication are not the same thing. I did not consider that a species from a harsh world might have strengths that a species from a safe world does not possess. You are not the first to make that mistake, Maya said. You probably will not be the last, but the fact that you are willing to examine your assumptions, that means something. That means growth. Over the next weeks, something unusual began to happen at the academy. The careful social structure that had existed since its founding began to shift, continued to sit with her colleagues, but she also spent time with Maya. The other students noticed. Some of them disapproved. Some of them were curious. They maintained their professional distance, but began asking Maya questions about her world. The ethereals seemed to brighten when they encountered her in the corridors. They began to interact with her more frequently, approaching her with genuine interest rather than clinical observation. And then the ethics seminar happened. A visiting scholar came to the academy to present on the topic of advancement. He was an important figure in the collective. He had written extensively on the hierarchies that governed galactic society. He had developed theories about which species were advanced enough to be trusted with powerful technology and which were not. During his presentation, he presented Earth as a case study in failure. He showed statistics about human violence. He showed data about human warfare. He showed examples of human irrationality and human cruelty. The human species, he said with absolute certainty, represents a failed civilization barely worth preserving. They have advanced technology in some areas but have not achieved the fundamental control of their impulses that marks a true civilization. They are aggressive, territorial, and prone to self-destruction. It is only the intervention of more advanced species that has prevented them from destroying themselves completely. There was a moment of silence in the seminar room. The human student was in the room. Everyone knew it. Everyone waited to see how she would respond. It was not Maya who responded. stood up and her carapace seemed to glow with intensity. "A failed civilization," she said, her voice clear and cutting through the seminar room with absolute authority, "does not produce individuals capable of maintaining psychological stability under extreme duress. A failed civilization does not create art in the face of certain death. A failed civilization does not teach its young that survival includes compassion for others." She looked directly at the visiting scholar. "Earth has produced humans who understand that advancement without wisdom is merely sophistication in service of emptiness. Earth has produced a girl who saved the lives of hundreds of students by understanding something about fear and survival that none of our weapons or protocols could accomplish. I suggest that before we dismiss human civilization as a failure, we examine what we have succeeded at and ask ourselves if our success is meaningful." The visiting scholar had no response. That night in the observation deck, Maya and stood together looking at the stars. Somewhere in that expanse was Earth. Somewhere in that expanse was the collective. Two worlds, two species, two completely different ways of understanding what it meant to survive. "The will not accept what I have learned here easily," said. "No," Maya agreed. "They will try to dismiss it. They will try to reestablish the hierarchy. They will argue that I am an anomaly, that one human girl does not change what they believe about the species as a whole." "Then how do I convince them?" asked. "You do not convince them through argument," Maya said. "You convince them through demonstration. You show them. You let them observe what humans can accomplish together. You prove that strength comes from understanding, not from dominance." "That will take time," said. 3 months into the academic year, the announcement came. The annual interspecies competition was being organized. It was meant to be a celebration of diversity. Representatives from academies across the galaxy would compete in physical tests, intellectual challenges, and creative problem-solving scenarios. The best teams from each academy would be selected. The competition was friendly but also very serious. Winning the competition reflected on the entire academy. The Collective's academy had won the last 4 competitions in a row. Was selected for the team immediately. She was one of the top students in her year, demonstrating excellence in every category. They applauded the selection. The ethereals flickered with approval. It was an expected and logical choice. Then approached Maya with a request. "I want you on the team," said. "As a human representative, I want you to compete with us." Maya was in the hydroponics lab when made this request. She was pruning plants, and she paused with her hands in the foliage. "That is not going to be simple," she said. "I do not think humans have ever competed in the interspecies competitions." "No," confirmed. "They have not, but there is no rule saying they cannot. We would need to file a formal request. There would be bureaucratic processes, but it is possible." "The other academies will object," Maya said. "Probably," agreed. "But I want to try. I want to show them what you can do." Maya filed the formal request 3 days later. She filled out the applications. She documented her academic standing. She submitted the required certifications, and she waited. The response came back as bureaucratic dismissal. Humans were not recognized as having the proper educational infrastructure. Earth was not a member of the Galactic Council. Therefore, human students could not compete in interstellar competitions. There were concerns about genetic advantages. There were concerns about fairness. There were concerns about precedent. It was the comment about genetic advantages that made Maya smile. She requested a formal appeal hearing before the competition committee. The hearing was scheduled for a week later. She would be allowed to present her case for 10 minutes. The committee would make a decision. She spent that week preparing. On the day of the hearing, Maya stood before the competition committee. There were representatives from 6 different academies. There were observers from the Galactic Council. There were officials whose job it was to maintain the rules and regulations of galactic sporting competitions. They looked at the human girl with expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical to openly hostile. She spoke for 40 minutes. She spoke about what it meant to be raised on a. She spoke about human psychology and human resilience and human problem-solving abilities that came not from comfort, but from necessity. She spoke about the gravity of Earth and how it had shaped human physiology and human strength in ways that were fundamentally different from other species. The concern about genetic advantage assumes that advantage comes from physical strength alone, she said. But advantage also comes from perspective. Advantage comes from understanding. Advantage comes from surviving things that should be unsurvivable. She spoke about the Void incident. She explained how human psychology had allowed her to remain calm when other species' training could not. She explained how humans learned differently because they had to learn faster, because mistakes had fatal consequences. You say that Earth is not advanced enough to participate, Maya said, but advancement is not the only measure of capability. Earth has produced people who understand survival at the deepest level, people who can remain functional under stress that would break most sapient beings. People who understand that cooperation and compassion are survival mechanisms, not weaknesses. She looked directly at the committee members. You worry about fairness, she continued. But fairness is not the same as equality. It is not fair to exclude people based on their origin. It is not fair to assume weakness based on technological advancement. It is not fair to hide behind regulations when those regulations are simply another way of maintaining hierarchy and preventing change. The committee went silent. The rules exist because they have always existed, Maya said finally. But rules can change. Progress happens when people challenge them. I am not asking for anything except the chance to try. Let me compete. If I fail, then you will know that humans cannot meet your standards. If I succeed, then you will know that you were wrong about us. Either way, you will have truth instead of assumptions. The committee voted. The result was 3 votes against and 3 votes in favor. There was 1 abstention. The director of Maya's academy broke the tie by voting yes. Humans could compete in the interspecies competition. The rules would need to be adjusted. Maya would need to compete as an individual rather than as a full team replacement, as humans were underrepresented in the academy. But she could compete. She could try. News of the decision spread quickly through the academy. Some students were excited, some were worried. The collective sent formal protests, but they were overruled by the committee decision. Simply smiled. The competition was scheduled for 1 week away. Maya trained intensely. She worked on physical challenges, pushing her body to its limits in the lower gravity of the station. She worked on intellectual puzzles, developing strategies for pattern recognition and problem-solving. She worked on the creative scenarios that would require her to think in ways that other species might not. The night before the competition found her in the observation deck again. Are you afraid? Asked. Terrified, Maya admitted. But fear and courage are not opposites. Courage is what you do when you are afraid and you do it anyway. Fear is just information. It tells you that something matters. It tells you that you care about the outcome. It is not something to eliminate. It is something to understand and use. Another Earth philosophy? Asked. A survival necessity, Maya replied. If we waited until we were not afraid to do important things, my species would have died out millions of years ago. Fear is how we know we are alive. Fear is how we know we care. The competition started in the morning. The physical challenges were intense. Maya was smaller than most competitors and heavier gravity affects her movements differently. But she was fast. Her movements were efficient. She had learned to move in ways that made sense for her body, not in ways that other species had decided were proper. The intellectual challenges played to different strengths. Some competitors had computational abilities that made standard mathematics trivial. Some had pattern recognition that seemed almost magical. But when the problems became ambiguous, when the questions had multiple answers, Maya excelled. She was used to solving problems with incomplete information. That was how survival worked on Earth. By the final day, the team was in strong position, had performed excellently in her category. The other students had competed well, but they were not in the lead. 2 other academies were ahead of them. The final challenge was announced, a scenario-based test. All competing students would be placed in a simulated habitat station that would experience a series of cascading failures. The teams would need to work together to solve impossible problems under time constraints and incomplete information. The scenario was harsh. Power systems failed. Life support degraded. The habitat structure began to breach in multiple locations. Water supplies were contaminated. Food production systems shut down. Everything fell apart at once, the way that real emergencies rarely followed logical sequences. Most teams tried to prevent all the failures. They tried to stabilize power. They tried to maintain life support. They tried to fix everything. It was logical. It was the right instinct. But it was also impossible. There was not enough time. There were not enough resources. The team was struggling when Maya made a suggestion. Stop, she said. Stop trying to prevent all the failures, accept that some systems will fail. You cannot save everything. You can only save what matters most. That is defeat, one of the students said. No, Maya replied. Defeat is trying to do everything and failing at all of it. This is triage. This is choosing what lives and what does not. This is survival thinking. She analyzed the scenario with cold precision. Humans and all carbon-based life forms need these things. Water, breathable atmosphere, minimum temperature range, minimum caloric intake. Every other system is secondary. We abandon sections that require resources we do not have. We consolidate the population. We prioritize survival over comfort. The team implemented her strategy. They stopped trying to maintain the full station. They sealed off sections that could not be saved. They consolidated resources into the core habitats. They accepted losses in order to achieve survival. And it worked. When the simulation ended, the team had successfully maintained a viable population through the entire cascade of failures. The other teams, who had tried to save everything, had lost significant portions of their populations. The team won the competition. As they received their medals, the stadium filled with applause, not just from their own academy, but from all the competitors. They were applauding the strategy. They were applauding the solution. They were applauding the fact that a team had won not through superior force or superior intelligence, but through superior perspective. The visiting scholar who had dismissed Earth civilization as a failure stood to applaud as well. Later that evening at the celebration ceremony, the director of the academy approached Maya. You have changed something here, she said. I am not sure exactly what, but I know you have changed it. I did not change anything, Maya said. I just helped people see what was already possible. Humans have been making impossible choices for thousands of years. We have been surviving in ways that should not be possible. I just shared that perspective. The rest was up to them. Stood with her, both of them watching the celebration around them. The ethereals and were all gathered together, not separated by hierarchy anymore, but united by the experience of what they had accomplished together. The collective will want to understand what happened here, said. They will want to know how a human girl and a team won a galactic competition. They will try to categorize it. They will try to fit it into their existing frameworks. And will they accept it? Maya asked. Some will, said. Some will resist, but that is always how change happens. Not everyone accepts it. 6 months later, the academic year came to an end. Both Maya and would be departing for advanced studies on their respective worlds. The Galactic Academy held a formal graduation ceremony to honor all graduating students. It was the kind of event that brought together representatives from every major civilization. The commanders attended. The ethereal philosophers attended. The scholars attended. Even Galactic Council members made appearances to recognize the students who were moving on to higher education. The academy had changed during the year. The careful hierarchies that had existed for 300 years had shifted, not disappeared, but shifted. Students from different species now ate together. Different species collaborated on projects. The divisions that had once seemed permanent had become permeable. Maya's class was small. Only 47 students were graduating. They stood in formal arrangement in the main assembly hall. Each student would receive recognition from their species representatives. Each would be honored for their specific accomplishments. Maya wore a simple blue cloth around her shoulders. It represented the oceans of Earth. She had requested permission to wear it, and after bureaucratic consideration, the Academy had approved. It was a simple gesture, but it meant something. It said that she was not trying to be something she was not. She was acknowledging where she came from. Wore the formal ceremonial carapace that marked her as a full member of the collective. It was an honor that was given only to those who had proven themselves worthy of their species' trust. But she had requested that the carapace be inscribed with a single phrase in the human language, 3 words: strength through understanding. When Maya was called forward to receive her formal graduation recognition, the hall went quiet. She walked to the center of the gathering with the same calm that had defined everything she did since arriving at the academy. No hesitation, no doubt, just forward movement. The commander presented her with the certificate of completion. The woman was the same one who had overseen the void creature incident. Her crystalline form seemed to catch the light differently now, as if she had learned to express emotion through her physical structure. You have taught us more than we have taught you, the commander said. That is the mark of a true educator. The ethereal representative dimmed their light in respect. It was a gesture reserved for those whom they considered to have achieved great understanding. The delegation bowed slightly, a formal acknowledgement of her presence and her strength. And then Maya smiled. It was the same smile that had stopped the void creature in its tracks. It was the same smile that had convinced to reconsider everything she believed about hierarchy and civilization. It was the same smile that had persuaded the competition committee to change their rules. It was the smile of someone who had survived the unsurvivable, someone who had understood the incomprehensible, someone who had learned to hope in the darkest places, and it was still there, still real. Still full of the quiet certainty that came from knowing that you had already faced your worst fears and kept moving forward. In the observation gallery, watching from behind reinforced glass, felt something shift in her understanding of the galaxy. Fear and respect were not the same thing. Strength and dominance were not the same thing. And advancement could be measured not just in technology, but in the capacity to change one's mind, to grow beyond initial assumptions, to recognize that the universe was far more complex and beautiful than any single species classification system could capture. When was called forward for her own recognition, she walked with purpose. She received her formal certificates and honors, but when she was finished, she walked directly to Maya and stood beside her. It was an unusual gesture. Typically, graduating students did not interact during the formal ceremony, but was breaking protocol. She was making a statement. She was showing that the friendship between these two students, these two representatives of species that were supposed to compete, was real and important. The commander smiled. It was rare for her kind to smile, and it was a beautiful thing to witness. "I believe," the commander said to the entire assembly, "that we have witnessed the beginning of something significant, not the end of competition between species, but the beginning of cooperation that transcends it." The applause that followed was genuine, not the polite applause of formal ceremony, but real acknowledgement of something important, of two students who had chosen to understand each other instead of dismissing each other, of a human girl and a girl who had become friends in a place where friendship seemed impossible. After the formal ceremony ended, Maya and stood on the observation deck one final time before their departures. They had said goodbye to other students. They had packed their belongings. Tomorrow they would board transport ships, would return to the collective. Maya would return to Earth. They would not see each other in person again for years. But something between them was permanent. Something had changed that could not be changed back. "When you return to the collective," Maya said, "they will try to dismiss what you have learned here. They will try to reestablish the old hierarchy. They will tell you that a human girl was an anomaly, that friendship across species is impractical, that cooperation is less efficient than competition. Will you resist?" "I will do something better," replied. "I will show them, not through argument. I have learned that argument is rarely effective. I will let them observe what humans and can accomplish together. I will not argue that strength comes from understanding. I will prove it." They looked at each other, human and different in every way that biology could make them different. One came from a world of constant danger. One came from a civilization of perfect safety and complete control. One had learned survival through necessity. One had been taught strategy through education. And yet neither could imagine understanding the galaxy without the other. "And when I return to Earth," Maya asked. "Then you will teach others what you have learned," said. "That we are not alone, that the galaxy is filled with beings struggling toward the same goals we are. Survival, understanding, the hope that someday we might build something together instead of competing against each other. Tell them that there is a student on a distant world who believes in them. Tell them that we are coming." Maya smiled that final smile, the one that said everything that words could not say, the one that communicated the full depth of her understanding, the one that said that she had looked at impossible odds and decided to survive anyway, that she had faced beings who did not understand her and chosen to help them understand, that she had come to a place where she did not belong and found a home. "I will," Maya said. "I will tell them, and I will tell them about you." The stars were visible through the observation deck windows, millions of them, each one a sun around which worlds orbited. On some of those worlds, civilizations were developing. On others, life was just beginning. On others still, the universe was exploring possibilities that neither Maya nor could yet imagine. "The galaxy will change," said. "I believe this now, not quickly, not easily, but it will change because of what we started here." "I do not believe it will change because of us," Maya said. I believe it will change because of what comes after us, because we showed that change is possible, because we proved that friendship can transcend species and civilization, because we asked people to see beyond their assumptions. They stood together in silence, watching the stars spin slowly in their ancient dance. Tomorrow they would separate. The vast distances of space would come between them. They would communicate through the communication networks that connected the civilizations of the galaxy, but it would not be the same as standing beside each other. Yet something between them was permanent, something that the distance of space could not diminish, something that time could not fade. It was understanding, it was respect, it was genuine care for another beings and growth and happiness. It was what happened when someone chose to see another being as they truly were instead of seeing only their species. It was what happened when fear and difference did not prevent connection. It was what happened when courage met compassion. Maya turned to leave, watched her go, and then turned and looked back out at the stars, toward the worlds that awaited her, carrying with her the memory of a human girl who had taught her that strength came not from dominance, but from understanding. The universe would continue turning. The civilizations would continue their ancient dances. The competitions between species would continue. But something fundamental had shifted. It could not be seen on maps. It could not be measured in technology or power or military strength. But it was there, in the memory of two students who had chosen to be friends, in the understanding that had grown between them, in the smile of a girl from who had come to a place of perfect safety and taught everyone there what it meant to be truly strong. The beginning had come. What came next would be written by those who came after, but it would be written with the knowledge that change was possible. That understanding transcended species, that the universe was vast enough to hold every kind of being and civilization, and that those beings could choose to build something together instead of tearing each other down. That was the real gift that Maya had brought to the galaxy, not her strength or her resilience, though those were real, but the gift of showing that things did not have to be the way they had always been. That progress was possible, that a human girl from a harsh world could come to an academy among the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy and teach them something they had forgotten. That it was possible to be afraid and still move forward, that it was possible to be different and still be understood, that it was possible to change the universe, not through violence or dominance, but through the simple act of being authentically yourself and helping others see the value in that authenticity. And as the night deepened around the observation deck, the stars continued their eternal spiral, and somewhere on Earth, a world continued spinning in its dangerous beauty, waiting for one human girl to return and tell them that they were not forgotten, that they were not abandoned, that they mattered, that the galaxy had noticed their strength. At first, but gradually, through demonstration and persistence, understanding grows. "That is patience," Maya said. "That is something I learned from you," replied. "Yes," Maya agreed, "but I have learned that time is something humans are good at managing. We do not expect quick solutions. We expect to keep trying until we find what works." Looked at her new friend. "I believe you will change the galaxy," she said. "I do not think that is my job," Maya replied. "I just think my job is to survive and to help other people survive. If that changes the galaxy, then that is something that happens as a result. But I am not trying to change anything. I am just trying to exist, just like I always have." And in the darkness of space, under the light of 1,000 stars, an unlikely friendship continued to grow between two beings who should never have been friends at all. Humans were not weak, they were just different, and sometimes different was stronger than advanced. She had learned long ago that other people's expectations were just noise. She had survived things that were supposed to be unsurvivable. She had learned to keep going when everything said stop. The academy would not be any different. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow would bring more students who did not understand her. Tomorrow would bring more of the cold distance of a place that was not her home. But tonight she would sleep. And tomorrow she would keep going. Just like she always had.